Welcome to the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. This is a podcast about our relationship with food and eating, body image, eating disorder recovery, mental health, and more. I am your host, Lynn Thorstenson, a registered nutrition therapist and body image coach based in the west of Ireland. And I'm so glad that you're here. So before we begin this week's podcast, I wanted to let you know that I am launching my 8-week program, Reclaiming Body Trust, which is a group program that is starting on Wednesday, the 30th of April, running for 8 Wednesday evenings, 7:30 to 9 p.m. Irish time, which will be online via Zoom. And this program is for you, which I'm thinking it might be if you like to listen to this podcast or following this newsletter on Substack. If you're somebody who has dieted for years and years and years and feeling really stuck, but don't really know where to go next, like where do we go if we don't diet? Or maybe you're somebody who's sort of been thinking about intuitive eating, maybe you've kind of dipped your toe into it, but struggling to get going on your own, or feeling kind of like you're getting stuck in certain places, or would love to, I suppose, do this journey with like-minded people. And this journey, by that I mean finding peace with food eating and your body. And body trust is really the missing link when we're moving away from dieting and obsession with food and weight towards freedom and body liberation. And the relationship with our bodies can be really complicated, and there's so many things that can disrupt it, and often from an early age. But that doesn't mean that we can't reclaim it, that we can't reclaim feeling good in our bodies and as a place of home. And this course, or this program, is, I suppose, part book club, part reflective, part coaching. And we're going to use the book Reclaiming Body Trust, A Path to Healing and Liberation, which came out in the end of 2022 by Hilary Knive and Dana Sturdivant. And I've picked this book because I think it's really, really rich, but also it can be a quite challenging read. And what I found when I launched this as a kind of a group program using the book as the framework back in 2023 was that it was a really wonderful way of, I suppose, having a container, but also a way of using a book and taking us away from screens for a bit, coming back to kind of more old school, reading paper versions, using pen and paper to record and journal on reflection questions, and then coming together online on Zoom, where we can utilizing technology to come together from wherever you are in the world, really. So over the 8 weeks program, I will facilitate you and the other group members through myriads of topics as it is working through the book together. So we'll be looking at things like your body story, moving away from diet culture, looking at nutrition and eating as through the lens of nourishment, and moving away from sort of nutrition through the lens of dieting. Then we're going to touch on grief and what has grief got to do with all of this, creating space and allowing for pleasure and satisfaction, reclaiming movement, and then deepening your body trust roots and widening the healing. So we'll be going through all of this together. So each week we'll be coming together, and then you'll be reading a chapter ahead of the next week, and I'll be giving you some guidance and questions to journal on, reflect on, and then we'll come back together as a group to talk about the things that has come up for us. And one of the things that I find when we're in a group experience is this shared experience, this experience of not feeling alone, and this way of learning from each other. And there's something different, I think, when we're coming together in a small group instead of, working one-to-one. And my hope is that this program will help you understand why your body trust got disrupted in the first place, and how you can reclaim it so that you can find your way to a path free from this rigid thinking about health, weight, bodies, and nourishment. And it will allow for a deep dive into how the culture that we all swim in has had a major impact on how we feel about our bodies, and help us move from seeing our bodies as an object instead of the home that they truly are. So if you're ready to try something different, instead of just trying harder, I would invite you to come and join me along with some others for this adventure. And I'm really hoping that after the 8 weeks, you will leave feeling more connected and at home in your body. And at the end of it, that your mind, time, and energy is freed up to explore all your heart's longing instead of being hijacked by, food and weight obsessions, which we know can take up a lot of our time, energy, and even our resources. So I want to keep this group small, and I'm going to limit the group size to 6 only. But I do need 3 people for it to go ahead. So if you have 2 friends that you're thinking, oh yeah, actually they would be really up for this, do sign up straight away and we can get going. So like I said, we started 30th of April. The investment for the full program is €250 or 270 US dollars for the full program. And I'm going to put all of the details to all of this, what I've just shared with you, as a link in the show notes. So you can go and click that. And if you're ready to sign up, or just email me if you have more questions. And finally, you will also have to buy yourself a copy of the book, either a hard copy or a hardback copy or a soft cover version. But they're very affordable. And even if you decide not to do this program with me in a group setting, I would still highly recommend the book because it's really amazing. So I think that's all. And I hope I get to see you there on a Zoom call really soon. But now let's get on with today's podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Joyful Nourishment podcast. And today I am here with Niamh Orbinski, who is a nutritionist, an intuitive eating counsellor, a yoga teacher, and a trainee psychotherapist who runs a weight-inclusive virtual nutrition practice specialising in intuitive eating, disordered eating, and body image. Niamh's work is health at every size aligned, meaning that she encourages health-promoting behaviours regardless of their outcome and weight. And as a nutrition counsellor, she likes to get to the root of food issues and habits through what is best described as food and body image therapy. She believes that when we look beyond weight, we open ourselves up to a healthier relationship with food, body, and self. She is also the author of No Apologies, Ditch Diet Culture and Rebuild Your Relationship with Food, which came out in 2023 by Harper Collins. And she's also a host of the Food and Beyond podcast. Thank you, Niamh, for joining me on the Joyful Nourishment podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, me too. And reading your bio there, I feel like our work is quite aligned. And I really like what you said there around looking at, like, when we sort of put weight loss to the side, we open up to kind of go much more deeper into this work and to see sort of what's underneath that often surface. So I'm hoping we can take our conversation in some of that direction, and the work that you do as a nutrition counselor and an intuitive eating counselor. But I always often start these conversations with looking at, what brings people to this work, supporting people in their relationship with food and body image.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll give you a little brief whistle-stop tour as to how I got here. I am trained as a traditional nutritionist, which, as you know, Lynn, is more weight-centric in its approach, and it always it kind of just didn't sit right with me. I remember years ago when I was working in corporate, I used to do a bit of coaching as part of that role, and I, of course, did a lot of weight management because when people hear you're a nutritionist and you work with people one-to-one, they think weight loss, right? And I did that, and I helped people lose weight, and they lost weight, and it was great, and they were delighted with themselves. But the weight always came back, and I was so curious about that. Like, we're doing all the right things. They're putting so much work into this. I mean, being on a weight loss journey is so hard. There's so much blood, sweat, and tears that go into seeing those pounds drop on the scale, and for it to come back is so disheartening and so difficult for people. So that kind of led me into exploring it a little bit more, and I discovered intuitive eating, and it just immediately, it just kind of sat into my soul, I guess, when I read it. Like, it just felt like, yes, this is exactly where we need to be. And it was actually through my yoga teacher training that I got curious about the mind-body connection, and that led me to uncover intuitive eating and discover it. And then I trained as an intuitive eating counsellor, and I kind of straddled the fence for a while. So I was working with clients kind of a lot on the side alongside my kind of corporate job. And I was coming from the intuitive eating place, but not really, you know, it was still kind of weight loss centered. And then I just said, right, I need to get off the fence here. I need to decide, am I going to stick with the weight centric, or am I going to move to the weight inclusive? And that in itself is a big journey, because it's quite radical, you know, as a professional, as a healthcare professional, to move away from weight centric practice. And it's very challenging in a weight centric world to do that as a professional, not just as a person in the world. It's really hard too. So I feel like there was a whole journey, which I'm sure you can relate to as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I think that's really common. And when I speak to people, like often how they've sort of made that transition from weight-centric training and even work into a more weight-inclusive approach, it takes time, and it is radical, and it can feel really lonely. And I think, like, I really resonate what you said when I came across intuitive eating and the book by Evelyn and Elise. I think it was around 2014. So that's about 10 years ago now. And I mean, the book was already out like 15 years, but I think the first one was published sometime in the mid 1990s. But it was like you said, it's like, oh, that really resonates. And then when I came across Health at Every Size, there was a language and a naming of some of the discomfort that I had also experienced in my clinical practice, just like you. This is working, but it's not working. And I don't know if it's helping people, and their relationship with food doesn't seem to be great, one way or the other. And then I also felt really lonely as a practitioner. I didn't know any other weight inclusive or non-diet practitioner in Ireland at that time. And now, 10 years later, there's quite a few of us, which is really nice, because it can feel so isolating.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I discovered it a few years after you, and I think I was maybe 2018 when I first uncovered intuitive eating. And I remember doing an intuitive eating workshop in maybe 2019. And it was like people were looking at me like, oh, this is a bit strange. This sounds too good to be true. The landscape has completely changed. I mean, now moving into 2025. It's very, very different. I still think there's much more room for more. But it's great to have a little tribe here in Ireland, because when I started, I think there was only 2 of us, maybe 3 of us in intuitive eating counsellors in Ireland. Like, it was very, very new.
Yeah. I haven't done that particular training, but I have a few other colleagues who are also weight inclusive practitioners and stuff, and just being able to have some of the conversations around the challenges and the empathy with clients, like you said, because like it's lonely for us as practitioners sometimes to work this way, but it's can equally be as lonely for the person who is trying to break free from diet culture and get out in the world and hear all these messages that has been completely normalized. So, you know, that has its own effect, I think, on recovery and on healing as well.
And can I just say as well, I think it's really important that when people work with a practitioner, that practitioner has solidly gone through their own process with diet culture. Because for a while there was a bit of like, oh yeah, I'm on this because it's trending. But like it's quite radical to really commit to this work. And as a practitioner, you need to be solid in it yourself. You need to fully believe in it and know where you stand with it, because you're the anchor for a client. I mean, a client is going to be going through so many, like I call it like the grief process. They'll be angry, they'll be sad, they'll bargain. Maybe diet culture isn't that bad though. Is it that
Yeah.
bad? Should I? Maybe I can do a little bit of both, right? That's a whole stage. It's totally normal for people to go through that. But if you, as the practitioner, are like, oh, maybe actually you're right, it's going to completely upend the client's process.
I agree. And one of the challenges in when you work in private practice and, working with people one to one is how you pay your own bills and stuff, is to be solid in that, exactly in that belief and foundation why you're practicing from a weight inclusive way, and being clear on the harm that weight centric practices and weight centric medical and healthcare actually perpetuates. So that you can say, this is how I work and this is why I work this way. And this is because this is how it aligns with my values and my ethical values. And it's okay if people aren't ready or it
Yeah.
isn't for them right now. And to say, okay, and then it's not going to be a good fit, because like you said, you have to be able to be that anchor because even when somebody's committed and they're ready and they know that what I have been doing for the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years has not got me to where I want to be. And it's still really challenging to let that go. So you need somebody to say, yeah, it can be trust the process, which is a big ask.
A big ask, especially depending on, the level of, I would say maybe someone living in a straight sized body, not to say that it's easy, but there are less external factors around, maybe safety in the world. If you live in a larger body, achieving a thinner body might actually give you safety because it gives you freedom from stigma. So there is a lot going on there when we're looking at different body sizes and the kind of stigma that people have or have not experienced in the external world, that you could totally understand for a person why it's so hard
Yeah,
for them to move away from that weight centric world.
absolutely. And I do want to say that even when I think about some of the clients that I work with in bigger bodies and higher weight bodies, though the work has been different than what it was for me personally, it still seems to be incredibly rewarding for them to break free and live. And just coming back to your book title, No Apologies, but to be able to be anchored within themselves and live their lives with no apologies and take up the space that they deserve to take up. And that is, it is rewarding and it is possible, but that journey, like you said, is going to be different from somebody in a straight size body or in a smaller body.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, because it's so incredible, to see someone go through a transformation, and it really is that, and not just in their relationship with food, but in their life. I think of situations I've had with clients, for example, like a client would have made themselves much smaller in a past life, like physically and psychologically and spiritually, and you see it come out when somebody comes to session and say, I was at a restaurant or at a party and I was sitting in a booth and I couldn't get out past somebody and I just asked them to move. And I'm like, yes, because
Yeah.
symbolically that is, I deserve to take up the amount of space that I need to take up in order to move through the world. And it takes a lot of courage to um to change in that way, and to ask for another person to give them what they need, which might be just stepping out so I have enough space.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. And it's just it's so wonderful. I think it's part of like big part of why I do this work as well. So you wrote a book in 2023, and by the time this episode would air, it will be 2025. Um, and No Apologies really talks about diet culture and how that piece affects our relationship with food and our bodies. And when I read your book, I was also, and I've been reflecting on this too, and there's been lots more books coming out recently in the recent maybe 4 or 5 years talking about diet culture. But I'm thinking about like when I got into some of this work, even like a decade ago, I feel like there wasn't that much conversation about, like, we call the cultural influences and stuff. And, there's the seminal work of Dr. Naomi Wolf, like Beauty Myth, which is from the 1990s. Um, but I don't know if there wasn't, the language wasn't there, but it's kind of like, and it felt like some of these challenges that we'd experience with food and with our bodies was kind of almost like a me problem. But now there's more conversation. I think it is a more open public discourse around the harms of diet culture, kind of like across the board. And I'm curious, like you've written a whole book, that goes into a lot of this. Like, how would you describe diet culture? If somebody says, what is that? What are you really talking about when you say you're talking about diet culture?
Well, when we hear the word diet culture, we might instantly think diets. And that is true. Diets are part of diet culture, but diets are a tool of diet culture. Diet culture is not just dieting. It actually encompasses much more than the tool that is dieting, which is something we're sold in order to lose weight or to shape the body, right? Diet culture is more systemic. So it's a system of beliefs that equates thinness with health, happiness, desirability, success. And diet culture is operating in our system, our societal system, sometimes unbeknownst to us. It's very hidden and it's very subtle and it shape shifts. So I would say diet culture infiltrates beauty culture as well. It can be very much present in that sphere where we feel like we have to change ourselves in order to get somewhere in the world. And that is all rooted in our external appearance and in weight. Yeah. And if we think about where we are affected by diet culture every day, it's when we turn on the TV or when we open up a fiction book. I mean, the amount of times I see diet culture references in just usually fiction that are targeted towards women, rampant. Like if I underlined and highlighted diet culture, diet culture, diet culture, it's so omnipresent. So it's infiltrating our belief system without us even realizing that it is.
And then when you said, it's like when you start waking up to it, you start seeing that it's everywhere. It's in, your everyday conversation, as well as like in books and magazines, like in this sort of insidious way, or this kind of subtle way that you're talking about, that you don't notice that until you do. And then once you start noticing it, I think that's where sometimes for people, there's a period of where you can feel quite lonely as well, because if you decide you don't want to partake in this stuff anymore, and particularly if your work, I've seen this, I work on my own, so I'm quite buffered, I think, from a lot of it, but I have I've had clients who work in very female dominated professions like teaching or office environments, and like the amount of diet culture that is just normalized in sort of these kind of general everyday types of conversations, it's like staggering. And if you don't want to partake in it anymore, it can be lonely, because it's like, well, what am I going to talk to about with these people now? Because that's all they talk about: what I ate or what I didn't eat, and how good I was, and how much I have to exercise, and how I have to repent for what or save up for the holiday, whatever. Like, it's endless and endless, isn't it?
Yeah. And the first kind of part of, I call it unsubscribing. And, the unsubscribing is so liberating. I just I'm the same as you, Lynn. Like I work by myself and I work in a whole world of food and body peace, right? So I'm somewhat buffered from it because maybe people who know me don't talk about diet culture in front of me. um, but sometimes it comes up and I feel this like, oh, this discomfort. And that's a real sign for people too. If you feel a little bit uncomfortable, it's a sign that it could be leaning towards that kind of diet culture end. But the very first, sorry, back to my first, initial train of thought, the first step is of rebuilding a relationship with food, and I talk about this in No Apologies, is removing diet culture. And we can't do that without first understanding what diet culture is and what it looks like. And the more that you practice this over time, the easier it will get. So for anyone listening who is like, what, how do I spot diet culture? Look out for shoulds, musts, and have tos. It's not a rule, sometimes that those words don't align with diet culture, but often they do. Oh, I have to go to the gym because I ate X, Y, and Z last night, or oh no, I shouldn't have that, chocolate because it's a Wednesday, or I must lose 10 pounds before the Christmas party or before that holiday that I'm going on. And that can be a little clue that it's tied to diet culture.
Yeah. And then you mentioned also the diet culture and its kind of sister sibling beauty culture. But now, over the last number of years, we've also sort of seen how it's swept into wellness culture, where it just shape shifted into this this way where we're, talking about health and health behaviors and lifestyle choices. And then I think what you just said there is such a helpful navigator for that space. If somebody's drawn to, you care about health, and I know you do, and I do too in different ways, but where there is those shoulds, musts, have tos, even in that space, that it's like, maybe now we're actually in some other kind of territory.
Totally. And it's so hard to spot. It's getting harder to spot as time goes on because it is a shapeshifter. It's very, I when I talk about No Apologies, I say it's very slippery. Like once you kind of get a grasp of it, it slips out of your hand again. And then it looks different and it's constantly moving and shape shifting. I mean, if we think about the dieting industry, it's the most successful industry in the world. I mean, it's worth billions upon billions upon billions. So there is a financial incentive to keep it operating in society. So it is there, and I don't think it's going to completely go away, but we can get to a stage where we unsubscribe and it doesn't infiltrate our lives. It doesn't have the power over us. And when you get to that point, it's so liberating because you're just like, nah, not for me. It's amazing.
Yeah. I love how you use the word unsubscribe. It just feels very contemporary. Because I can just physically visualize myself going unsubscribe from each email or each
Yeah.
things or each, when you're in the social media space and kind of going, no, that's not helpful right now. And then going to seek out the things that are helpful. And one of the things that I've noticed myself is to come back to this word flexible, that there is like the opportunity to be flexible in one's approach, because if we come away from that musts and shoulds and have tos, then we're able to, if we can respond in this more dynamic way with our ever-changing needs, then it feels that feels more freeing to me to be able to be flexible.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine if I think about my kind of health practices, I couldn't imagine them without flexibility. The whole energy changes when you add in flexibility. Like I was talking about this last week online on Instagram. I was really busy and I hadn't been to yoga. Yoga is my kind of movement of choice. And I could feel my whole body. Like I was stiff, I was heavy and I mean heavy internally, this feeling of heaviness. I was fatigued. I was a bit like, my body felt a bit clunky. You know, one of my clients described it as like, I feel like I'm wading through mud. And I thought that's such an eloquent description that we probably all experience at times. And my body was calling for movement, like just having this little roar inside me, like you need to move your body. And I still have choice in that. You know, do I want to move or do I not want to move? What am I going to do? And the flexibility allowed me to move in a way that worked for me. So I didn't want to get out in the dark and drive in rush hour traffic. I didn't have 2 hours or 2.5 hours to make to a studio class, but I could stay at home and put on an online class and practice for 30 minutes. And then I just felt so freed up. So the flexibility allows you to match your health practices with your life. And diet culture doesn't allow for that flexibility. And that means that when your life is great, you're great at promoting behaviours. And when your life isn't, which, like, let's face it, right? That's the reality of life.
Yeah.
Everything falls away. So what happens in those periods? You know, the flexibility allows us to actually be more consistent with healthy promoting behaviours.
And to be returning to those, like you just described, the ones that serves us, even if life takes us in a slightly different direction or our time is occupied when we hear things. And I think this happens as well, like with eating. If you don't have very strict rules about this or that, you can feel into when I'm eating a certain way that feels really good. And then, you know, busyness, life takes you away from that for a while. And then you start feeling like, oh, that doesn't feel great. But it's like, oh, when I do this, then I feel better. So you can return again to those, a bit like in a meditation practice when the mind wanders, we just keep returning back because it's easier to return, I think, when we come from that open, flexible, compassionate approach than when we're stuck in rigidity, because then we're back in that binary all or nothing kind of thinking where a lot of people often find themselves when they start with this thing. So you're also an intuitive eating counselor, and I think people hear this word, and like you mentioned there earlier in our conversation that, you know, it became quite trendy in the last 4 or 5 years. All of a sudden, you know, everybody was talking about intuitive eating, even though, you know, the book itself, Intuitive Eating, the original copy came out in 1990s. This is new. And I know of practitioners who worked from weight inclusive non-diet practices like from the 80s as well. Like this isn't new, but it became a bit bigger. And then you hear a lot of people, okay, so when we're talking about intuitive eating, what are we really talking about? Like what is if you were going to give a snapshot kind of what we're talking about, what do we, if people haven't read the book or they're quite new to the concept, what are the things people need to know that this is what we're talking about, and then we can talk about what it really isn't.
Yeah. I think the best way to describe intuitive eating, and I really like describing it in this way, is that we are prioritizing internal cues over external ones. So when I say internal cues, I mean hunger, fullness, satisfaction, also the physical sensation of emotion, because every emotion has a physical sensation. And as we know, food can be very emotional. And this is where emotional eating comes into play, of which intuitive eating really supports us with. Versus external cues, which might be coming from diet culture, which are how many calories is in this, how many macros is in this, what portion size should I eat? And what I found from clinical experience is that the external cues can be very confusing for people because there is constantly more information out there in society around what we should do, what we must do, what we have to do, what we shouldn't do around food. Whereas if we can connect back into how do I feel when I eat this food? How hungry am I now versus when I eat this meal versus this meal? How do certain foods make me feel in my body? We can use that well of information as a foundation to make future choices around food. So food becomes really easy. It genuinely just becomes easy. And I'm sure, Lynn, you can attest this as well. Because we know how to connect. We know how to ask the body, how hungry am I? What do I need in this moment? What would feel good for me? Rather than looking outside to what's the newest trend? What should I do with health? So that I feel like is obviously there's a lot inside intuitive eating, but I think that's the easiest way to describe it.
Yeah. So moving towards internalized cues and responding to those in an appropriate way rather than relying on external cues all the time.
Yes, absolutely. And I often say that dieting is really easy in the beginning and it gets harder as time goes on. Intuitive eating is the opposite.
Yeah, that's true too. And that's a really nice reminder, I think, for people, because it's so easy, I think, to always look at past experiences, if they were positive, through those rose-tinted glasses and thinking, well, if I just try harder, I can get back to it was easy. So I'm sure like it will get easy again. But it won't get easier with dieting because it's just not conducive. It's not conducive for our body's perceptive of survival to live in a perpetual state of what it experiences as a famine.
And to add on to that, it's not conducive to living.
Mm-mm.
I mean, if you told me I had to live on a diet for the rest of my life, like I just instantly feel so depressed. Like
Yeah.
it takes up so much energy, it takes up so much space. Christy Harrison, a dietitian in the States, she calls it the life thief diet culture. And it
Yeah.
really is because
Yeah.
it robs us of life.
Yeah, and it makes life really small because everything has to be, monitored around it. Or when people have been in a cycle of chronic dieting on and off for years, it's like on or off, on or off. And it's like there's a relief when it's off for a while until that feels stressful, and then back on the dieting wagon again. And then that feels good in the beginning because it feels like you're back in control until you aren't. And until it impacts on, everyday lives, like where you go, who you go out with, if you go out at all, how you socialize, how you don't socialize, and all of those things. So then it becomes really, really isolating. And so then the other question I had, I think, so you described what intuitive eating is, but what are some of the misconceptions that people have? And I think particularly, and I often see this when, on social media, where it's much of the information is very bite-sized and people have maybe only educated themselves about, and I've talked actually probably mostly towards professionals that tend to think about this in this way, who haven't read the book, who don't have any training or background really understanding what intuitive eating is. So what are some of those misconceptions and that pushback that you hear people say or that you've come across?
Well, the first is that intuitive eating is, eat what you want whenever you want. All caution to the wind. Don't care about your body. Just eat whatever you want. And yes, that is true to an extent, but it's a checking in process, not a checking out process. And I think this is where diet culture infiltrates this misconception about intuitive eating, because we think that in order to just eat whatever you want, that means that you don't care about your body. But actually it means the opposite, because yes, we want to allow in all foods. We want to give ourselves unconditional permission to eat, but we want to check in with the body and alert ourselves to how that feels. So I know I can eat pizza every night of the week if I want to. I can eat chocolate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner if I want to. But do I want to? No, because those foods don't they're amazing and I love them and they're in my diet, but I don't feel energetic and I don't feel light in my body. And that is not to do with weight, by the way. You can feel heavy or light in your body no matter what size you are. I don't have a pep in my step when I eat in that way. And I don't want to feel like that. I want to feel vibrant. I want to feel energetic. I want to feel mobile. I want to feel flexible. And food really allows me to feel that way. The way that I eat really affects that. So through the checking in process, you really build this well of food experiences. So you know you can have all these foods if you want, but because you've got this foundation of having checked in with your body, you know, okay, if I have this, it's likely I feel this way. If I have this, it's likely I feel this way. And we're looking at this from a very neutral place. What would I like to feel right now? And that doesn't mean that we always choose feeling amazing, right? There will be times when I know if I overeat at in a certain restaurant, I'm probably going to feel a little bit heavy later, but sometimes I'll do it anyway because the food is so good, and that's absolutely fine. It's only if we're doing that all the time, we might not be feeling the way that we would like to feel.
Yeah. And I think as well, that's where when we lift that weight of diet culture and intentional weight loss, that there's much more space for that exploration and to more space for compassion if we eat something a bit to even some level of physical discomfort because it tastes really good. And it's just, and that kind of, it's not something we do all the time because that doesn't feel good. So there's just coming back to that space of checking in, flexibility, responding appropriately, and being that sense of more attunement when one's own inner cues. And that's really difficult to do when we're stuck on some rigid diet or we're in the claws of diet culture, I think.
Yeah, we can't do that. And that's why the first section in No Apologies is remove, and giving ourselves permission to eat all foods is really part of that. Because if we are driven by scarcity, we are always going to choose the foods that we feel the scarcity around. And that means that we can't gain access to the information that the body is giving us, because the high of allowing these foods in when we have this scarcity mindset won't allow us to access that. So it's really important that that's early in the process that we remove the rules. And you're so right, that I love that idea of like lifting the weight of diet culture, because then we can gain access and explore what's underneath it.
Yeah. So what are some of the concerns that you have, and fears that people come with when they want to work with you and they're sort of like, I can't, this is often what happens. I think people get to a place, I cannot do another diet. And sometimes it's like the body literally says, no, I'm not doing any more of this. And then it keeps people stuck in this place where I'm not in a body that I particularly like the look of or the feel of. I might have health concerns, but I just can't do another diet. And so so then they discover intuitive eating, they discover you, and they're like, right. But I like, what is what you hear in that sort of initial conversation with people who are a bit in this kind of stuck place?
Yeah. Well, biggest by far, I would say, is a fear of weight gain, or a fear of not having the body that they've been told their whole life they're going to get if they just work hard enough. They're not going to lose weight. So either the fear of weight gain or the fear of not losing weight. So there's a few things that I say to people in this instance. When there is a real fear around never losing weight and there's a real desire for weight loss, I often will say, look, I get that. And 99% of people who come to me want to lose weight, right? That's completely normal and natural because of what we're exposed to. But I always ask, are you ready to pause the pursuit of weight loss for at least 6 months? Because that's how long I work with people. For at least 6 months. You can decide in the future if you want to go back to that. That is absolutely your choice and zero judgment here. But can you give yourself the opportunity to try something else for a 6-month period. And that usually helps people because they're like, okay, I just have to commit to this for 6 months, and then I can always roll back on that decision if I want to. Many people don't ever roll back, but having that in the back of their mind helps them to actually move away, at least for a period of time. The fear of weight gain is probably a little bit deeper. It's really challenging, and we kind of have to work through that and process that, because weight gain can mean different things to different people. So what's underneath the fear of weight gain? What do you fear will happen if you gain weight? And we really want to get into like the emotional, the psychological, the spiritual reasons behind this. I mean, one thing I've heard many times over is, I'll never find love. I'll never meet somebody. I'll never get married. And that's very real. And if you have that fear and this is a really big desire for you to have a partner or have a family, it makes sense, right? So we have to really explore those and process them. And that's usually an ongoing process as I work with somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear pretty much the same. And the fear of weight gain is very real. And again, like you said, there could be lots of different things underneath that. And I think that's also one of the biggest things that keeps people stuck, whether we're talking about disordered eating or we're talking about somebody in a diagnosable eating disorder. Also, I think it's really, really, really common.
I have actually an episode on fear of weight gain on my podcast, Food, Body and Beyond, but I can send you a link to that as well.
Yes, we can link it in the show notes. So as we're wrapping up this a conversation, Niamh, which has been really wonderful, I would love to hear from you 3 things that you would say to somebody who is listening to this conversation, who is in that place of contemplation of leaving diet culture behind.
Well, firstly, I would say, has dieting worked? And really look at your past experiences. Has dieting worked? Has it got me to where I really want to get to? Because you need to use your own experience to push you towards either choice, staying where you are or moving forward. The second thing is, and I love this saying, choose your hard. Because staying where you are is hard and changing is hard. And you need to choose your hard. So that's the second thing. And the third thing that I would say, especially for somebody who is maybe embarking on this process or maybe is doing some of this work themselves, is to trust the process, because there is a lot of trust that's required in this whole journey, a lot of trust. And that's where it can really be helpful to have professional support, and because the professional support can anchor you when you're in that stage of grief. Like I said, you're bargaining, you're feeling doubt, you're sad, you're angry, and it's very easy to go back to what better the devil you know than you don't, right? When you're in that place, and without professional support, it can be really hard to escape that.
Yeah, great advice. I think it's super helpful to make people reflect on where they're at, and I love that. Choose your hard. So final question, Niamh, is I always ask all my guests what their form of joyful nourishment is. So what does joyful nourishment mean to you?
I have loads. I have loads. I'll be here all night because I have so many forms of joyful nourishment. Yoga, nature, space in my life, flexibility, fresh air, blue skies, writing, therapy, fulfilling, safe relationships, incense, candles. I have loads and loads and loads, and I love the joyful nourishment piece, because nourishment can be joyful. It doesn't have to be punishing.
Yes, thank you. So where can people find you if they want to check out your podcast, your website, the work you do, your book, and all of the beautiful work that you put out in the world?
So I'm most active on Instagram. I am at Nutrition with Niamh. My website is also www.nutritionwithniamh.com. My podcast is Food, Body and Beyond. And my book is called No Apologies, which you can get in physical paperback, on ebook or on audiobook.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. And I'd link everything in the show notes so people can just find it. And thank you so much, Niamh, for being part of the Joyful Nourishment podcast.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening. The Joyful Nourishment podcast is produced with no financial backing, and your support means a lot to keep this project going. If this episode has been helpful in any way, please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. This helps the podcast to be found by others. And of course, you can also forward this episode to a friend whom you think may benefit. Find out more about what I offer on straightforwardnutrition.com, and if you're interested in working with me, please use the link in the show notes to book in for a free initial 30-minute session. And finally, please come and join the Joyful Nourishment community over on Substack, unless you're there already, by subscribing to my newsletter using the link below.